The first sound was not a growl. It was a sharp, dry crack, almost like a gunshot, but hollower, echoing off rusted shipping containers and broken glass. Then came a second one, then a third. Ivy Lark stopped in her tracks. One boot sunk into the mulch of dead leaves and railway gravel. She was in the East Yard, a derelict stretch of land just outside Richmond's old industrial corridor. Officially abandoned. Unofficially, nobody wanted to know. The wind carried the scent of creosote, damp steel, and something fouler, something animal. Ivy had smelled that kind of musk before. It came with fear, sweat, blood, and teeth. She crouched low, adjusting the worn strap of the body cam slung beneath her jacket. Her breath fogged faintly in the warm dusk. July was heavy with heat, but Ivy's palms were cold. The cracks sounded again, this time followed by a series of popping bursts. Firecrackers. She eased forward along the gravel, past a collapsed section of fencing overgrown with sumac and bindweed. In the fading light, she saw movement, small, low to the ground, weaving between the ribs of a broken-down boxcar. It wasn't a raccoon. It was sleek, golden spotted. A leopard. No, two. Cubs. Her throat caught. She knew the rumors. People whispered about exotic animals being dumped in remote lots, used for illegal breeding or backyard zoos. Most of them died, caged or starved. But this was different. These cubs were loose, thin, frightened. And then she saw the reason why. A bright flash tore the dusk, followed by a cracking boom. The cubs bolted, scrambling behind a warped wooden pallet covered in plastic sheeting. From the shadows beyond the fencing, Ivy spotted them. 3 teenage boys, maybe late teens, in black hoodies with their faces partially covered. One held a pack of cheap fireworks. Another was filming on his phone. The third lit a fuse and tossed a string of red firecrackers toward the enclosure. They burst mid-air, raining sparks over the tarp. The cubs didn't scream, but they flinched violently, pressing into each other, eyes wide and wild. Ivy didn't move. She didn't call out. She just watched, because something else had entered the scene, and it didn't come from the shadows. It came from the far end of the rail yard, emerging like smoke, silent, massive, deliberate. A full-grown leopard, not inside the enclosure, outside, between the boys and the chain link. Her coat was darker, sun-dulled, with faint scars along her shoulder and flank. Her body was taut with tension, but she didn't charge. She waited. Ivy's breath stalled. She had seen wildcats act out of panic, hunger, desperation. But this was something else. This leopard was calculating, and she wasn't blinking. The boys didn't notice her at first. They were too busy laughing, checking their phones. One even knelt near the fence to get a closer shot of the cowering cubs. That's when the leopard took a step forward, silent as vapor. Ivy moved her hand to the tranquilizer pistol tucked under her vest. She didn't want to use it. Not yet, but if the leopard lunged, the boys wouldn't stand a chance. Then the smallest cub let out a low, shaky yowl. The boy filming stopped. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. He looked up, and that's when he saw her. The leopard, 10 feet away, eyes locked on his. She didn't growl. She didn't bare her teeth. She just stood there breathing. The boy dropped his phone. The others turned. And then, like a switch flipping, the mood changed. The firecrackers fell silent. Nobody moved. Then, without warning, the leopard turned and vanished into the brush, leaving only stillness and a rising sense of something unsettled. The boys ran. Not because she chased them, because she didn't. Ivy stayed hidden until the last echo of footsteps faded. Then she crossed the gravel, stepping carefully past the tarpon pallet wall. The cubs were curled in the corner of the makeshift shelter, shaking. One hissed weakly as she approached. She knelt. "I'm not here to hurt," she whispered, voice low and even. "I promise." They didn't believe her, but they didn't run. She examined the shelter. Makeshift, yes, but someone had cared. There were bones scattered from old meals. A shredded sleeping bag. Bowls made from old paint cans. Someone tried to feed them, but it was clear they weren't from here. Their limbs were leaner. Their coats not yet shed their rosettes. Someone had smuggled them, then abandoned them. But the adult leopard? She was not part of their litter. which meant something far more mysterious was happening here. She had adopted them, chosen them, protected them, and now she was gone again. Ivy spent the next 2 hours setting up trail cams. She had just enough gear in her pack to create a perimeter. She left the cubs alone, trusting they wouldn't wander far. Something told her they wouldn't. They had already learned that the safest place in the yard was here. Before she left, she placed a small tracking beacon in the corner of the enclosure. Not to trap them, just to know if they left. Then she backed out, moving silent between the undergrowth. As she passed the place where the leopard had stood, Ivy felt the hairs on her neck lift. There were no prints, no broken stems, nothing. But something in the air was still heavy, like breath held in a room just before it breaks. Back in her SUV, Ivy sat in silence. She should have called it in, filed a report, asked for backup, but she didn't. Instead, she reached for her phone and opened the encrypted folder she used for field cases. She typed just one note. Unknown adult, Leopard appears to be watching over abandoned cubs. Not biological, protecting them. Then, after a pause, she added, Firecrackers thrown deliberately. Cubs targeted. Boys escaped. And then, beneath that, third-party intervention prevented violence. She didn't use the word revenge. Not yet. But deep in her chest, a seed of it had already begun to take root. Because Ivy knew predators. And she knew patience. And whatever had just happened out there in the yard wasn't over. The next morning, the city moved like it always did, indifferent. No sirens, no public outrage. Just the usual traffic over the I-95 overpass and a few joggers slicing through the southern edge of Monroe Park, unaware of what had nearly unfolded less than 3 miles away. Ivy Lark sat alone in her temporary operations van, converted from an old news truck, parked on a side street between a boarded-up diner and an out-of-business muffler shop. She was already on her 3rd cup of coffee, though she hadn't tasted any of it. Her mind was with the cubs. She uploaded the trail cam footage from the night before, frame by frame. The cameras had been motion-triggered and infrared, basic field tech, nothing fancy. But it had caught enough. At 1:34 a.m., the cubs were restless, pacing. One pawed at a flattened tire in the corner of the enclosure, batting it like it might contain food. At 1:52, the wind picked up. When the tarps lifted and slapped against the chain link, both cubs jumped. Then, at 2:08 a.m., a new shape emerged. Not from a brush, not from the gravel, from the shadows behind a stack of crates at the far edge of the enclosure. The adult leopard. She moved like mist, confident, measured, not as if she was stalking, more like inspecting. She paused at the edge of the cub's sight, her silhouette barely lit by ambient infrared glow. The cubs noticed her immediately, but they didn't flee. They stood, waited, and then one of them, likely the smaller, stepped forward and crouched low, tail flicking. A gesture of submission. Ivy leaned closer to the screen. The adult did not enter. She didn't push her way in, didn't try to dominate the food space. She circled, Saturday, watched, and just like the night before, she stayed there, still, silent, for exactly 31 minutes before disappearing into the trees. Guard duty. Ivy exhaled slowly. What kind of bond was this? These weren't her cubs. They couldn't be. The age gap didn't make sense, and their coats carried different genetics, subtle details a trained eye would spot. This wasn't maternal in the traditional sense. It was chosen, voluntary. There was something else, too. The way the leopard watched the perimeter, listened for the slightest crack or rustle, focused on every corner except the cubs themselves. She was guarding from something, or someone. The next clip made Ivy freeze. 2:44 nachts. The same boys had returned. Hooded, silent this time. No laughter, no Firecrackers. One of them held a flashlight under his chin like he was telling a ghost story. Another had a slingshot. They crept close to the fencing again. Ivy's pulse kicked. The adult leopard did not run. She shifted positions and lowered her body, coiled, ready. But she didn't attack. The boys reached the edge of the tarp. Then suddenly one of them flinched, looked behind him, and bolted. The others followed instantly, dropping what looked like a plastic bag in the dirt. The cameras didn't show what they saw, but Ivy already knew. She scanned ahead to the next clip. At 3:01, the leopard returned from the direction the boys had fled. Calm. No blood on her coat. No panique. Just presence. That was the moment Ivy realized. This leopard wasn't reactive. She was calculating. Intentional. She was learning them. Later that day, Ivy returned to the site. The cubs were still there, hiding under a sheet of plywood. She didn't disturb them. Instead, she examined the plastic bag left behind. Inside were 3 items: a half-used pack of firecrackers, a crowbar, and something she hadn't expected, a cheap dog collar, stain and frayed. Who brings a collar to a leopard's den? She pulled out gloves and inspected the inside. There were faint letters written in marker. Bella. Not a name for a wildcat. Not a name for a monster. A name someone had once spoken gently. And, suddenly, everything shifted. What if this leopard wasn't wild? What if she had belonged to someone? What if she had been someone's pet? The thought disturbed her more than she expected. Because if true, then someone had taught her to live near humans. Someone had failed her. And when that failure became cruelty, she'd chosen to act like a wild animal again, but on her own terms. By the time the city finally responded to Ivy's internal report, 2 days had passed. Animal Control sent an intern. Federal Wildlife Review sent a scanned PDF. And the local precinct called to say one of the boys had turned himself in, his leg mauled but non-life-threatening. The incident was chalked up as animal aggression near an unlicensed holding site. No charges filed. No arrests. Case closed. Except Ivy couldn't let it go. She printed the trail cam stills, labeled timestamps, highlighted the moments where the leopard deliberately avoided attack, where she protected instead of hunted. She built a private case file under the code name. Belladonna. It was a half-joke, half-prayer. The plant known as deadly nightshade. Beautiful. Poisonous. Misunderstood. Just like the cat. But Ivy knew the city wouldn't protect her. Not in the way she needed. So she started calling sanctuaries out west. Montana, Oregon, Colorado. One finally replied. A large, secured wildlife preserve outside Spokane. They had space. They had fencing. And more importantly, they didn't ask questions. Now came the hard part. She had to capture the leopard. Not to punish her, but to give her a place where she didn't have to be watchdog and warden and ghost all at once. She would be free, but not wild. Safe, but not caged. Ivy had done it before. Tranquilizer darts. Relocation, but never with an animal this sharp. This personal. She knew the cost of a mistake. One wrong move, and this animal would vanish forever. Or worse, lash out. And Ivy didn't want to be the reason Belladonna crossed a line she had so carefully avoided. Because if she did, there would be no saving her. Not from the city, not from the law, and not from herself. The call came at 11:42 p.m. Ivy was still awake, sitting in her van, laptop closed, sipping stale coffee and watching the amber lights blink across the Richmond skyline. Her phone buzzed, cutting through the stillness. It was Jalen, the night security guard in auto salvage yard 2 blocks from the East Yard. He'd seen Ivy earlier in the week, asking questions. She'd left him a number, just in case. Something's going down, he said. Kids are back. Loud. Real loud. And I saw something move near the old loading platform. Bigger than a dog. Way bigger. Ivy didn't hesitate. She grabbed her dart rifle, 3 cartridges, her camcorder, and left the rest. The yard looked different at night. Not quieter, deeper, like something was listening. She parked outside the old bottling plant, cut her lights, and approached on foot. The moon was bright but high, making shadows stretch long and black across the gravel and weeds. As she got closer, she heard them, voices strained with forced courage. The same boys, but more reckless. One had brought a boombox, music low but pounding. Another held a duffel bag. They weren't just messing around now. They were escalating. She crouched behind a rusted drum, steadying her breath. Through a crack in the fencing, she saw one of the cubs, a flicker of spots and fur, hunched low inside the shelter. The second was nowhere to be seen. The boy with the duffel reached in and pulled out 2 Roman candles. I say we light 'em both. At once. Then chuck 'em in. The others laughed nervously. But they screamed like babies. That was when the first firecracker went off. It arced high, blazing red, and landed just inches from the plywood lean-to. The cub darted out, yowling, bolting for cover. The second cub followed from the shadows, clearly limping. Another firecracker burst, this one a chain, fast and chaotic. The boys howled. Then the third sound came. But it wasn't a firecracker. It was silence, followed by stillness. One boy, the tallest, froze. Mid-laugh, eyes locked on something just behind his friend. "Turn around," he whispered. The smallest turned and dropped his flashlight. There she stood, the leopard, full-grown, in full view, just inside the perimeter, standing on the rusted rail line. No snarl, no growl. She didn't need to make a sound. Her shoulders rolled forward slowly as she moved toward them, each paw step precise, measured, like she had rehearsed it. One boy raised his hands. "Easy, don't move. Don't." But another panicked. He threw a lit Roman candle, missing wildly, sending sparks into the air. That was the trigger, not the flame, the choice. The leopard lunged, not toward the cubs, toward the one who aimed. Not to kill, to teach. The first swipe caught him across the thigh, deep but not fatal. He screamed, dropped, rolled backward into the dirt. The other two ran, but she didn't chase. She stepped forward, slowly, until she stood over the fallen boy. Her body blocked the moonlight, casting her silhouette across him, her breath visible in the air. She bent low, stared into his eyes, and stayed there, silent, still, unforgiving. The boy choked on his sobs, covered his face with shaking hands. Ivy didn't move. Her camera was rolling, hands trembling. She had never seen anything like it. This wasn't instinct. It was intent. The leopard looked at him, not like prey, but like something lower, a coward. And then she stepped back. She turned, walked to the cubs, now huddled together near the base of a broken beam, and laid down beside them. Not triumphant, not feral. Done. Ivy moved only when she was sure the boys were gone. She crept around the fencing, careful not to startle the trio. The adult leopard looked up once, eyes calm, ancient, as if to say, "I won't do more, but I had to do this." Ivy slowly loaded her tranquilizer dart, not to stop her, but because it was time. She couldn't let this go further, couldn't leave it to luck next time. She crouched, steady hands, silent breath. She didn't fire at the head or chest. She aimed low, at the back flank. Non letal dose. Enough to slow. The dart hissed. Hit. The leopard flinched but didn't run. She turned to Ivy, stared again, and this time she closed her eyes, laid her head down between the cubs, and slept. Transport was quiet. The sanctuary team had arrived at dawn, working with gentle speed. The cubs were caged with calm blankets and chicken scent cloths. The mother was secured in a padded crate, pulse monitored, vitals normal. They left before the press arrived. Ivy made no statements. She turned over only what was legally required. The rest, she kept, on a hard drive labeled "Witness, not evidence." Later that week, one of the boys gave an anonymous interview. He didn't name Ivy, or the yard, or even the animal. He just said, it wasn't like an animal attack. She looked at me like she knew who I was, what I did, and she decided to let me go. When asked if he'd ever go near a wild animal again, he laughed, but it wasn't a real laugh. That wasn't an animal. That was something older than us. Like she'd seen the worst of people and still didn't kill me. That's worse, you know. The clip went viral, then faded. But Ivy saved it, along with one still from her camcorder. The leopard's face, lit by the moon. Cub beside her, wind in her fur. No virol, no escrime. Just justice, delivered in silence. The van rolled into the sanctuary gates just before noon, under a sky so blue it felt almost sarcastic. Ivy sat in the passenger seat of the transport vehicle, eyes raw from 3 nights of no real sleep. The leopard was sedated again, resting in a padded crate behind her. The cubs were in a separate, temperature-controlled carrier, fed, hydrated, but subdued. No one meowed. No one growled. It was the silence that stayed with her, the kind that only comes after a storm. The Painted Sky Sanctuary was an old citrus farm turned wildlife refuge on the outer edge of Hollow Ridge. Ivy had first volunteered there at 19, back when it was run by a grizzled man named Cal Monroe who spoke to cougars like they were old poker buddies. Now it was Dr. Rena Kovacs who ran it, an Eastern European vet who walked like she never fully left a war zone. Rena was already waiting at the gate when the van pulled in, clipboard in hand, sunglasses hiding the grief she didn't voice. They unloaded the mother first. "You said she didn't fight?" Rena asked as they rolled the crate onto the platform. "Didn't even flinch when the dart hit," Ivy said quietly. It's like she knew. Rena looked at her. "Leopards don't forgive." "I'm not sure this one was forgiving," Ivy said. She was just finished. Inside the isolation barn, the Leopard was placed on a heated platform. Rena checked her vitals, blood work, hydration. Minor lacerations. No internal trauma. Pulse steady. "She's fine," Rena said. "But she's watching." And she was. Even half sedated, the Leopard's eyes followed them. Sharp, unblinking, ancient. The cubs were brought in next. The smaller one had bruising on the back leg, likely from a metal shard during the firework incident. The other, more nervous, kept pressing itself between Ivy and the wall. "They imprint when they're scared," Rena murmured. "Don't mistake it for affection." "I won't," Ivy said, but she still sat down and let the cub nuzzle her hand. Word got out within 36 hours. Not because of Ivy, because one of the boys posted a clip to TikTok. Bro, she looked at me like she was human. The comments exploded. Then came the reaction videos. The think pieces. The petitions. Most people took the Leopard side. Some didn't. "Why is this animal not euthanized?" wrote one local city official in a public Facebook post. "She attacked a minor. We're lucky it wasn't fatal. Wildlife belongs in the wild, or not at all." Ivy didn't respond publicly. Neither did Rena. But quietly, a letter arrived from a local elementary school. It was handwritten by a third-grade class. "We hope the mama cat is okay. We would like to name her Shadow Wind." They drew pictures. Some accurate, some cartoonish. One had a crown on her head. Rena taped them to the barn door. Shadow Wind didn't react. But the cubs did. They sniffed the pages each time they passed them. Weeks passed. The mother healed faster than expected. She didn't attempt to climb, pace, or break out. She simply watched, ate what she was given, sat with her cubs at dusk, letting them climb over her or sleep pressed against her ribcage. She never purred, never growled. But once, only once, Ivy swore she saw her close her eyes when the wind rustled the eucalyptus trees outside the barn window. That was as close to peace as Ivy believed she'd ever asked for. There were interviews, not by Ivy, but a few quietly authorized by Rena. She brought in a small local documentary crew. No lights, no narration. Just 12 days of silent observation. No one tried to dramatize it. The footage said enough. And then one morning, Ivy received a letter. Not email, not digital. It was from a boy, the one the Leopard had slashed. His real name wasn't included, just initials. He didn't ask for forgiveness, didn't make excuses, just wrote, "I thought hurting things made me feel more powerful." But she looked at me like I was nothing. That was worse than claws. "If you ever let her go, tell her thank you." I don't know why. Just, "Thank you." Ivy didn't reply, but she folded the letter and slid it into the pocket of her camera case. 6 months later, the Leopard and her cubs were moved to a larger habitat at the sanctuary, one with trees, climbing structures, and a pond that caught the light at exactly the right angle each evening. They were never put on display. No names on plaques. No shows. But the sanctuary visitors could glimpse them through gaps in the tree line if they waited long enough, quietly enough. And once in a while, only rarely, the Leopard would step into full view, tail twitching, shoulders high. She never roared. She didn't need to. The silence was enough. 3 years later, Ivy stood at the edge of the sanctuary's new perimeter trail, camera slung over her shoulder, boots worn smooth at the heels. The world had changed since the Firecracker incident. City ordinances tightened, wildlife protection laws expanded, and 1,000 strangers now followed Painted Sky's live updates like it was their own backyard. But Shadow Wind remained the same. Elusive, present, but never visible unless she chose to be. Tourists often asked Ivy if the Leopard still remembered. After all this time, Does she know who you are? Ivy never answered with certainty, but there were signs, glimpses. One cold February morning, Ivy had dropped a thermos outside the low fence line, and the sound startled the cubs, now nearly full-grown. Shadow Wind had appeared from behind a tree, silent as breath, and stared at her for a long, motionless minute. Then she looked away, and that was it. Not affection, not anger, recognition. That winter, Ivy curated a photo exhibit at the Hollow Ridge Museum titled The Silence Between Us. No labels, just moments. A mother licking her cub's paw after a thunderstorm. A claw mark etched into dry bark. A child's crayon drawing taped beside an infrared camera capture. And at the center, one wide shot. A shadowy leopard perched on a rock, backlit by dawn, her gaze pinned directly on the lens. No flash, no filters, just presence. The boy never contacted her again, but his anonymous letter lived in a frame tucked in the back office. Not on display, not for anyone else, just as a reminder that some things don't end in apology or punishment. Some things just mark you and move on. On the final day of the exhibit, a little girl pressed her face to the glass in front of the central leopard photo and whispered, "She looks like she's not afraid of anything." Ivy smiled faintly. "She's not," she said, "but not because she was born that way." The girl tilted her head. "Then why?" Ivy crouched beside her and traced the shape of the leopard's silhouette with her finger on the glass. "Because she survived it anyway. Not every scar shows. Not every hero roars. And not every act of justice looks like punishment. Sometimes it looks like a leopard walking away,